Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. FPL Consult here, and in today's video we're going to have an early look at a Game Week 9 wildcard. I'm going to share with you guys a couple of things I would consider if I was hitting the chip this week. Take a look at the fixtures moving forward before I show you my Game Week 9 wildcard draft. So if you guys do enjoy this one, please do drop a like, please do subscribe as well. And before we jump in, I do want to shout out the charity drive that we are doing on the channel, where I will be donating 20 pence per new subscriber from now to the point we reach 10k subscribers to Mindset charity. Now Mindset is a mental health charity, something that is really close to my heart, and we only recently launched this charity drive on the channel. So if you're watching this video and you aren't subscribed, all you have to do is hit the subscribe button and I will be donating more money to Mindset. And I love the work that they do with regards to mental health. They do a lot of outreach programs to raise awareness on mental health. And they also reach out to those in need and provide support as well. So if this is a cause you feel you want to kind of, contribute to, all you have to do is hit the subscribe button. Alright, so enough of that. Let's have a look at a couple of things I would consider if I was on a Game Week 9 wildcard. Now, the first thing that I would keep in mind is the Game Week 12 fixture swings. Now, we just had a kind of a fixture swing or a mini one in Game Week 8 where I would think that was a window a lot of people wildcarded. The next main one is in Game Week 12. So now in Game Week 9, we're kind of in the middle here of two fixture swings. So that may make it quite tricky. So I think if you are in a situation where you are able to save the wild card and not use it in Game Week 9, that is probably what I would do. But if somehow you desperately need to use it, I would definitely keep in mind the Game Week 12 fixture swings for a couple of teams. So those in green are the teams where the fixture run starts to get really good from Game Week 12 onwards. And those in red are the ones where now in kind of Game Week 9 we're targeting them. But then come the time Game Week 12 comes around, they would have a really bad run of fixtures moving forward. So need to kind of take note of these teams and kind of cater to how many players we want to have in our teams now in Game Week 9 when we're wildcarding, to kind of, get ready for these fixture swings, whether it's bad ones or good ones. So let's have a look at the next point here, and it is mainly with regards to Arsenal assets. In fact, the second and third point largely center around the Arsenal assets. And the reason why I want to pay more attention to this is because I think it is quite tricky now in Game Week 9 to decide actually how many assets from Arsenal you want to have in your draft. Now, the main reason is because from Game Week 9 to Game Week 11, which we will see later on in the fixture ticker, Arsenal have a really bad run of fixtures and they're kind of very low at the bottom of the fixture ticker if we're wildcarding now in Game Week 9. But when you move forward to Game Week 12, the fixtures start to get really good for them for quite a long period of time. So we're in a situation now in Game Week 9 where you don't want to have too many Arsenal assets, but in 3 to 4 game weeks time you will want them back. So that also leads me to my next point, which is how on a Game Week 9 wildcard, we will need to have a plan to get triple Arsenal into the team by Game Week 12. You just have to either start off with more Arsenal assets and make a bit of a compromise, or you go with very little, but you have kind of a planned, mapped out by Game Week 12 where you can make a couple of transfers and you'll get to triple Arsenal by then. So I'll definitely have the Arsenal assets at the back of my mind. And the next thing I also want to speak about is Spurs attackers, because now is the kind of the time where a lot of people are jumping onto Spurs assets, and it does make sense as well. They do have a very good run moving forward, but it does start to get tricky from Game Week 12 onwards, where we just saw in the first point there. So firstly, how many do we go for? That's one of the points. And secondly, if we're choosing between the attackers, which one do you choose? Right, so obviously I think there are a lot of attackers coming up right now, and bearing in mind as well, they have a couple of players coming back from injury like Son and Richarlison. I do think like minutes for attackers wise starts to get slightly more tricky in terms of trying to predict who's going to start or who's going to get majority of the minutes. But I've put here in kind of a, not in any order of preference, but the main ones that I think people will be considering. So it's Johnson, Maddison, Son and Solanke. All of them have good reason to make their way into our teams for Game Week 9. And we'll discuss more of that as we look at the Game Week 9 wildcard draft later on. But kind of in terms of things to consider, I would really look at these assets specifically and choose the ones that I think would be good for at least a good period of time until the Game Week 12 fixture swing comes around for them and maybe we offload. So the last point I have here is with regards to Wolves' asset. Now, the main thing with Wolves here is that in game week 8, which has just passed, they had their Man City fixture. So that is honestly their last tough fixture for a really long period of time. From game week 9 onwards, they go on this incredible run. Now, the fact of the matter is that they haven't done really well in the first 8 game weeks, simply because they played really difficult opposition. So at the back of my mind, I'm kind of thinking, will Wolves be able to turn it around? And for you guys as well on a game week 9 wildcard, you will have to think about whether you are able to back them. Even though we haven't really seen them in terms of performances do really well in the first 8 game weeks, you need to kind of think about whether you're able to back them for this good run of fixtures coming up, because it's really good and it also decides how many Wolves assets you will have. So a bit of a spoiler is that I have 2 Wolves assets in the game week 9 wildcard, but that's simply because my own opinion is that I'm quite hot on Wolves in that moving forward, I do expect them to pick up form. I don't feel like they are, to me, a relegation side, and I do think like they would start to pick up a couple of wins and also keep a couple of clean sheets moving forward. So because of that, I do have a couple more Wolves assets in my game week 9 team. But if you feel differently and you don't think that Wolves will be able to turn this around, then obviously have lesser Wolves assets in your game week 9 wildcard. So in general, all these points that we just discussed are things that I would have at the back of my mind as I'm building a game week 9 wildcard. Now, let's have a look at the fixtures. Obviously, when we're building wildcards, we need to consider the fixtures moving forward. And I'll highlight in particular the game week 12 fixture swings for the teams in point 1 that we just spoke about. So on to the fixtures, and what I've done here is I've taken a look at the next 6 game weeks and arranged the teams in order of how easy their fixture run is moving forward. And at the top of the ticker is Brentford. So it's quite incredible because I've been doing these videos every week, and Brentford has been top of the fixture ticker for a good number of game weeks running already. So it's incredible that they still continue to be there in terms of fixtures. Players like Mbumo, definitely still someone you would want to consider on your game week 9 wildcard. Something I would think about as well is Yohan Wissa. I keep him on the radar, because there is news coming out that he will be back very soon, in which case if you get conclusive news before the game week 9 deadline that Wissa is going to be fit, maybe you could include him in your game week 9 wildcard as well. Now, looking further down the list, there's Everton with a really good run of fixtures moving forward still. This carried on for quite a good number of game weeks before already. I think game week 6, game week 7, people were already starting to bring Everton assets in. So it continues for quite a good period of time. So Everton is still a decent enough team to go for in terms of fixtures. Wolves as well, this is the one where we're speaking about their fixtures turning. In game week 8, they would have just finished playing Manchester City, in which case from game week 9 onwards, the fixtures are just so good. It's Brighton in game week 9 specifically away. Maybe it's not super easy, but after that it's Crystal Palace, Southampton, Fulham, Bournemouth, Everton. They really have a super good run all the way up till you probably next use your wild card. So Wolves is a team I'm quite hot on, and I will have again a couple of assets that we'll discuss from Wolves in the draft. Now further down after Wolves, there's also Fulham. Fulham is a team that I feel players like Anthony Robinson, for example, is again a bit of a spoiler, but I feel like he's been a bit forgotten. So now with a good fixture run coming up for him, a decent enough run, I do think like he comes back into my thinking, and I will discuss more about him in the next section. Obviously, players like Emil Smith-Rowe, Raul Jimenez, if you want to go there, can also be in the consideration. Now, I go further down the list now, and I want to look at the teams at the bottom here. So it's Newcastle, Liverpool, and Arsenal. Specifically the Arsenal fixtures here, because we did mention in the previous section that game week 9 to game week 11, it gets really tricky for them. It's Liverpool at home, Newcastle away, Chelsea away. So I think obviously Arsenal is a top side, but you would think that this is one of their trickiest runs of fixtures. So Liverpool, Newcastle, and Chelsea is a bad run. Moving forward, could you go with lesser Arsenal assets in your game week 9 draft, but then cater for a bit of transfers in game week 12 to bring them back? Where the fixtures start to get really good is Nottingham Forest at home in game week 12, West Ham away in 13, Manchester United at home in game week 14, and to be frank, I think Manchester United at home for Arsenal could be a field game as well, to be frank. So I do think like the fixtures from game week 12 onwards are so good for Arsenal. And obviously now, because you can only see up to game week 14, maybe it doesn't seem that good, but you look all the way until game week 19, for example, they also have one of the best runs, and they actually shoot all the way to maybe the third or fourth in terms of fixture ticker. If you expand the duration that we're looking at from game week 9 all the way until game week 12, when their fixtures swing all the way until your next wild card. So Arsenal is definitely a team I would look at in terms of how to get more Arsenal assets into your team from game week 12. In terms of Liverpool assets as well, I think it's worth discussing this a little bit, because they do have quite a difficult run moving forward. It's Arsenal, Brighton, Villa. Southampton in 12 is okay, but after that it's Man City and Newcastle. So I would argue that this is a time that maybe you could fade the Liverpool assets, but obviously in the first few game weeks they've done really well. So if you do have a couple of Liverpool assets in your game week 9 wildcard, I would imagine that not a lot of people will go there, and this would largely come down to your own judgment of Liverpool and whether they will continue to do well in this run of fixtures moving forward. But for the price that they're at, in terms of their defensive assets or their attacking assets, I do think like it is quite pricey, and I don't mind just fading them for better, cheaper assets elsewhere, and then just find a way to bring them back later on after the tough run. So that's with regards to Liverpool assets, and overall, this is the fixture ticker that we're looking at here. So if you do want to kind of pause the video and take a closer in-depth look in terms of the fixtures for each of the specific teams, feel free to do so, but I think I've highlighted mostly what I wanted to point out. If not, let's now have a look at the Game Week 9 early wildcard draft. So finally, here is my early Game Week 9 wildcard draft. There are still a couple more games to go for Game Week 8, so obviously things could change. But I just thought I'd put out this early draft here in terms of a starting point, and then you could obviously make changes to it as we go along in the week. So here is my thinking for now. I've gone with Flecken and Fabianski as the keeper pairing. Now, the main reason why I've still stuck with Flecken is not because I backed the Brentford defense. In fact, I think recently they have struggled quite a bit to get clean sheets. But it's just because of Arsenal's bad fixture run from Game Week 9 to Game Week 11 that makes me think it is worth fading those three fixtures that are difficult for Arsenal, going for a different keeper now with slightly better fixtures, obviously a less than ideal defense when you compare it to Arsenal. But why not take this chance? And thereafter, maybe in Game Week 12, you could cater for a move from Flecken to Raya. I wouldn't rule that out for this draft, but I just don't think it makes sense for me to go for Raya and Gabriel, double Arsenal defense, when they're playing Liverpool in Game Week 9, and then Newcastle and Chelsea in the next two as well. So I've gone with Flecken here, with that thinking in mind. Fabianski is simply just the bench for the keeper. I don't imagine you would use him much. Now, in terms of the defenders, in the starting 11, I've gone with Robinson, Lewis, and Gabriel, and on the bench, I have Nuri and Greaves. So, in the starting 11 specifically, Gabriel is mainly here as an anchor for the Arsenal assets, in which case you start with one now in Game Week 9, and then you only need to bring in two more come the time Game Week 12 comes around. So I think he's someone that kind of allows you to put a foothold on the Arsenal assets, and obviously in his own right, even if he doesn't keep a clean sheet, I would think that in terms of his aerial threat from set pieces, he makes up for it, and he could always score a bullet hitter from a corner against these difficult teams. So Gabriel, with his attacking threat, makes up for the fact that the fixtures aren't as good for Game Week 9 to Game Week 11, and then obviously moving forward you would want him in your team. So he's here in the draft for sure. In terms of Lewis as well, Southampton at home here is a great fixture for Man City, and I also do think like Rico Lewis moving forward will have decent enough minutes. Champions League obviously will come into the fray moving forward, and there are quite a number of games for Man City to play, so he is obviously a bit of a gamble, in which case the other assets we will need to make sure that we can rely on them, and that's why I've gone with Robinson, who is a nailed starter for Fulham, and then Nuri, who is on the bench, as the kind of players who could come in for Lewis in the event he, kind of doesn't start, or if we get news that he doesn't start. Then Greaves is last on the bench, also a nailed starter for Ipswich, but Ipswich defensively not super ideal. Something I would also consider is whether you have enough money to upgrade Greaves to Leif Davies, so that you have quite a number of other defenders to rotate in for Lewis in the event that we get news he doesn't start. So that's with regards to Lewis, but again, he's very cheap at 4.7, and I think it's worth the risk going for him. So he's in the draft. For Robinson here, again, that we spoke about just now, Fulham being pretty high up the fixture ticker, Robinson feels to me like someone who has been forgotten, and it's, I feel, the right time now to bring him back. Everton away in game week 9, he starts to have a decent enough run, and he could be rotated obviously with the bench options, specifically 8 Nuri as well, because the fixtures are so good. So I do think like 8 Nuri and Robinson, the rotation there could very well be something that you go for if you do go for this back line here, and then ideally start Lewis and Gabriel week in, week out. So that's the thinking behind the defenders. The main reason why I've gone with those two on the bench, 8 Nuri, is simply because I love the Wolves fixtures, and I do think like attackingly, 8 Nuri is one of the most attacking defenders this season, and he's already gotten quite a number of returns already. So 8 Nuri is in the draft for the Wolves fixtures and also the attacking threat he possesses, but I do imagine he will come into the starting 11 for most weeks. Now, for Greaves, obviously as I've mentioned just now, Davies is the better asset, but to bring the team value lower, I've gone with Greaves here at 4.1 million just as a bit of a bench fodder. So in terms of midfielders, I have Mbeumo, Johnson, Foden, and Palmer. So I don't think I need to speak much about Mbeumo. In fact, he is the vice captain here against Ipswich at home, because I actually favour that fixture a little bit more than Palmer against Newcastle at home. You could obviously go for Palmer if you think that's the way you want to put the vice captain, but I have it on Mbeumo for now. In terms of the kind of other midfielders aside from Mbeumo, I've gone with Johnson here as part of a Spurs double up. Now, the reason why I've gone with Johnson in midfield instead of someone like Maddison or Son, for example, is for different reasons. For Maddison, he's 1 million more expensive than Johnson, and I think attacking threat wise or goal threat wise, Johnson has a little bit more goal threat than James Maddison. So I prefer to go for the attacker that is more likely to get goals instead of assists and take that 1 million cost saving to spend elsewhere. As you see in the draft, there's players like Gabriel, a premium defender, and then there's Palmer and Haaland as well, so quite expensive already. And then I want to include a Foden in the draft, which we'll speak about in a while. So things can get quite expensive if we want to include all these players. So Johnson here instead of Maddison gives me that cost saving. For Son, the player I would compare him to is Palmer. Would I prefer going for Palmer or Son? Now, the reason why I've gone for Palmer instead is because I think there are other assets from Spurs that can cover off the Son returns, specifically Johnson and Solanke, for example, that I've gone for here. But obviously, players like Maddison could also be someone that can cover Son's returns. But I think for Chelsea, I do think like Palmer is a player that is so in form right now that I'm okay to go without Son, go for Palmer as the premium midfielder here, and then go for the other two Spurs assets in Johnson and Solanke to cover off the Spurs attack. So that's the main reason why I've chosen to go this kind of a formation or this kind of a pairing of Johnson and Solanke and then Palmer as the premium midfielder. Now, to mainly speak about Foden now, obviously there is risks associated with him. When Kevin De Bruyne comes back, I think even more so his minutes won't be secure, but now just seems to be a decent enough time to go very ahead of the curve, I would say, and jump on Foden against Southampton at home. Now, Man City do have a decent enough run. Fixtures do turn for Man City from game week 12 onwards that we saw in the first point in the first section of the video. So Foden is by no means a long-term pick, and it's mainly because in the short term the fixtures are firstly good for Man City and KDB seems to still be out, in which case I have Foden in here. If these kind of preconditions were not in place, I don't think I would go for Foden because he's so expensive. At 9.2 million, there's quite a bit of investment and you really want him to start. So it's simply because Kevin De Bruyne still seems to be out and the fixtures moving forward are explosive enough for Foden that I think it's worth taking a gamble here. So you could obviously, if you don't think Foden is someone that you want to take a risk on, go for someone else. So I wouldn't rule out the possibility that maybe you even want to go for Son in this spot and, you know, take Johnson out, for example. But for the time being, I have Foden in here as a bit of an explosive differential. Now, in terms of the Rodgers pick on the bench, the fixtures moving forward for Aston Villa are not extremely good, especially from now in game week 9, Bournemouth is alright, but game week 10, 11 and 12 is not super good. But thereafter, from game week 13 onwards, the Aston Villa fixtures are actually really, really good, and they are, as I've mentioned in the first section just now, together with the teams that have a good fixture swing from game week 12 onwards. The teams specifically were Arsenal Aston Villa, and Brighton. So I do think like Rodgers here, having him as a bit of a cheap enabler, someone that you will start from say game week 12 or 13 onwards, I don't mind him here. And obviously we know the value that he provides in that he starts pretty much every other game, and he's playing for a decent enough attacking side in Aston Villa as well. Now up front, finally, it's Cunha, Haaland, and Solanke. Haaland, again, I don't speak too much about him because in Game Week 9, he is obviously the best captain. In fact, a triple captaincy shout as well. So we will have more discussions on triple captaincy later on in the week. But I do think like against Southampton, I can't see myself captaining anyone else. And also in the next few game weeks, City's fixtures are decent enough that you will want to captain Haaland. So I will have him in the draft here. For Cunha and Solanke, I'll speak about Solanke first. Again, the Spurs double up. I've chosen to go for him here. But again, I do also acknowledge that his role has changed a bit in terms of maybe him dropping slightly deeper and then allowing wingers to run in behind him. So I also do think like Spurs attackers being fit and coming back already, players like Son and Richarlison, does make it tricky to anticipate whether Solanke is fully nailed for 90 minutes or could he get a rest, for example, in some games and they start Richarlison instead. For what it's worth, I don't think it's super likely, but I also do think like it's not out of this world that Solanke would potentially start the game and then come off maybe in the 70th or 80th minute, so get his minutes reduced by Richarlison, who also plays in that number 9 spot. So that's kind of my thoughts on Solanke here. Now for Cunha, I do think like as I've said about the Wolves asset, I'm quite hot on Wolves, and Cunha is a pick that I've kind of looked at from the early game weeks as well, even when they were playing the difficult opposition, and I just like how he operates as an attacker. Like he's not someone that is very predictable in, and also he's physically very strong and he has good finishing in him as well, whether it's, you know, clear-cut chances or whether it is slightly difficult ones, maybe outside the box. He has that ability to just put the ball at the back of the net, and we've seen that even in last season as well. In the later part of last season, Cunha was quite on fire for Wolves. So I honestly think that having him here on a Game Week 9 wildcard draft, not only is he someone I don't think a lot of people will be going for, but also the fact that, you know, he's on penalties and Wolves fixtures are really very good. I don't think I see myself going without Cunha, and he's only 6.5 million. Obviously, there are other assets, other cheaper strikers that do have decent enough fixtures as well, like Calvert-Lewin, but just based off of the fact that if you have enough money, I will prefer Cunha moving forward. So that's my thinking behind this Game Week 9 wildcard draft. Overall, in terms of a big picture view, I have 2 Spurs assets. I have also triple Man City. That could obviously drop from Game Week 12 onwards when maybe you ship Foden out, for example. I have Gabriel here as the anchor Arsenal asset. I have Mbeumo and Flecken for Brentford's good run of fixtures. And thereafter, there's Robinson as a bit of a forgotten man, but one that I think moving forward will do well. And then on the bench, a couple of really good enablers as well. So that's what I'm thinking for now in terms of Game Week 9 early wildcard draft. Again, by no means is this a final draft. Things are going to change as we go along in the week, but I think it is a good enough starting point with regards to my thoughts surrounding these players. So let me know what you think of the draft down in the comments below. Would you make any changes as well, and who would you bring into the draft, and who would you remove as well? If not, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, please do drop a like, please do subscribe as well. And again, I will be donating 20 pence per new subscriber from now till the 10k subscriber mark. So if you're watching my videos all this while and you haven't subscribed yet, this is your call, I guess, to hit the subscribe button and do a bit for charity, but also help us in hitting 10k subscribers as well. If not, I will catch you guys in more Game Week 9 content coming very soon. Bye bye.